conveying the information, just letting you know ahead of time. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي صدق الله العلي العظيم. Dear brothers, dear sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First of all, I would like to thank the dear brother, Dr. Buhaider, for hosting this gathering and preparing the venue for this event. He's been working very hard since the beginning of Muharram, probably before the beginning of Muharram, and he's the soldier behind the scenes. So I would like to thank him first and foremost. Second of all, I would like to thank you for attending. I've been part of this community for about 15 odd years, since I was a little boy, about your age, and I'm honored to be able to give back to this community that has given me so much. So with that being said, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. These days we have, alhamdulillah, access to many different social media platforms, websites, etc. We have YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and if you're really ancient, Facebook. They're Muslim, non-Muslim, atheist, Christians, anything. They probably don't even know it. We have, alhamdulillah, gained that access to that information and that, shall we say, perspectives, all those perspectives. So a recurring theme that we find these days in whether it is podcasts, videos, replies in the comments, a common theme that we see these days is that religion is separate from science, in the sense that you are either religious or you're scientific. You either believe in a God or you understand what's going on. You are either smart or you believe in a God. That's generally the idea that's going around these days, especially in the West. So that's the claim, and inshallah I hope to answer this claim, because frankly it's so widespread these days, even in the Muslim world, that, and the answer is so very simple. It's just a shame that the people who are trying to answer these are not exactly qualified to. I'm talking online. People in the comments or making podcasts again, they're not exactly qualified to. So we hope to answer that, inshallah. First of all, before we answer, we need to understand why this claim exists. Why do people believe that religious people have nothing to do with science? Let's look at it from their perspective for a second. That usually helps a lot. First of all, alaykum assalam wa rahmatullah. First of all, we have, from their perspective, they see religious people refusing to believe anything except the idea of a God, which is fair, but it reaches a point where people refuse to believe anything exists except with the direct making of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we know for a fact that that's not true, because you and I, we both have parents. That's how we came to this world. Now, obviously, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He willed it, He made it possible. It was with His will and by His will that we came to this world. But does that contradict with the idea of parents? Obviously not. However, some people don't seem to think so. Imagine you as a scientist, you discover something new called a nebula, where stars are formed, yeah? And you pose that to religious people. Hey, we found out how stars are formed. And a religious person comes and says, no, God created stars, not nebulae. You can see how much of an issue that can be, especially if you don't believe in a God yourself. Second of all, scientific claims made by religious people, often using religious texts as sources for that. What do I mean? I mean, for example, we have a verse in the Quran, وَالشَّمْسُ تَجْرِي لِمُسْتَقَرٍّ لَهَا, and the sun runs to its resting place. Some people have come and said, this is proof that the sun revolves around the earth, and that the earth is stationary in the middle of the universe, the sun goes around the earth. And citing the Quran is my proof. The unchanging word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is my proof. Again, as a person who is scientifically inclined, you look at this sort of claim and you immediately assume that not only does the person talking have no clue what they're talking about, the Quran also is very incorrect. And so you see how that person who thinks they're religious actually stabbed themselves in the back. They claimed something was in the Quran. It was not in the Quran. The Quran never says that the earth is the center of the universe, and gave the wrong image. All these scholars for centuries have been trying to guide people into understanding the Quran properly and making other people understand Islam, and then one person comes and destroys all of that. Third of all, we have a claim that's made, I've heard it myself, the lack of scientific contribution by religious people. Somebody once said, he was talking about how the Nobel Prize in scientific fields has been won by a Muslim 3 times. Muslims comprise about 1.3 billion people on this earth, and 3 of them got a Nobel Prize. So obviously this must be proof that if the more religious you are, the less academically and scientifically inclined you are. At least that's the perspective, that's the claim. We also have the fact that religious people, whether they're Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, Shinto, anything, they believe in a higher power. Now, this is outside the realm of science. It's not material. So a scientist looks at that and says, okay, so that's your claim. That's fine. You do whatever you want. You want to talk about life after death? You want to talk about what happened before life? That's fine. You do your own thing. Let me talk about the material world. When I talk about the material world, you shush, is basically what's going on. You stay quiet, let me do the talking. So that's generally what we have. That's the perspective that we have at this point. So we now want to know, what's the reply? How do we answer that? Well, first of all, we need to know, religion and Islam are very much intertwined with science. One of them supports the other in the sense that you use religion to guide your scientific expeditions, scientific endeavors. And then you use those scientific discoveries to enforce your religious beliefs. Sheikh Ali Salah Taqi. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Sheikh. So yeah, the truth is that one cannot go without the other. You cannot be religiously inclined if you don't know, if you're talking about the reason we live in this world, but you don't know how this world exists. That's obviously problematic, and vice versa. You know what the world is, if you're scientifically inclined. You generally know how it came to exist, but you don't exactly know what to do with that knowledge. So they are very much intertwined. Well, if that's the case, if it's so obvious, why is it that people have this perspective? Why do people think that it's obvious? But why do other people not think so? This is, to a large part, our fault as Muslims. Unfortunately, we've been shooting ourselves in the foot for centuries. And what I mean by that is, we've had scholars, especially in the 11th and 12th century, maybe 13th, 14th, etc. We've had scholars, alhamdulillah, not from our from our group, alhamdulillah, mostly from outside, claiming that scientific studies are either the work of the devil or mathematics, for example, work of the devil, etc. Basically telling people not to study sciences, right? Because for the fear that it will weaken somebody's faith if they study science or philosophy. So instead of guiding their people and helping them understand these sciences even more, they decided to just ban the entire thing. And they decided that if you, for example, if you see a phenomenon, Instead of, for example, you see an apple falling from a tree, Isaac Newton said, oh, gravity. What we're supposed to do instead is, oh, an apple fell from the tree? God must have willed it, and just leave it there, and that's it. And by doing that, what they did was they killed all the scientific eagerness that Muslims had in the Islamic Golden Age. The Islamic Golden Age was, literally the Golden Age. 2/3 of the stars, named stars, are named have Arabic names, while the West were, shall we say, drilling holes in the head of patients to let the devil out. If you had a minor headache, they drill a hole in your head. Meanwhile, we were discovering wonders in the human body, in medicine, and I'm sure my father can confirm that, him being a doctor. So, what do we do then? Well, it's very simple. In order to rival the Western world in science, we must first learn from them. Just like they learned from us. We always claim that everything you know is because of us. That's fine. It's now our turn to learn from them, take what they say, study it. Obviously, if it's not true, we find scientific proof to refute it. If it is true, we take it. It's our turn to learn from them, and then over time, we will get stronger. It's just a matter of time. So that's first. Second of all, the major issue here. It's misunderstanding religion, misunderstanding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, misunderstanding the Quran. When you claim that there's no way on earth a star, for example, was created because of anything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, nebulae don't exist, galaxies don't exist, it's all CGI. Yeah? What you've done is you've accidentally limited Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You've claimed that there's no way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could create stars unless it was Him doing it directly. And that's what you've done. You thought you were being religious and sticking to your beliefs. You've done the complete opposite. And even worse is when they bring a verse from the Quran to prove what they say. And it usually goes something like this. You'd make a claim, somebody, for example, refuses a new idea in science. For example, let's talk 400, 300 years ago, when they were first pitching the idea that the sun revolves around the earth, yeah? Let's bring that example. Sorry, that the earth revolves around the sun. And you would come and say, no, we have this verse that says that the sun moves around the earth. And you use that verse as your proof. No scientific explanation, just the Quran says so, right? Over time, the other theory, which is the fact that the sun is the center of the solar system, over time that was proven. It was proven using various scientific methods. Now, the person who was clinging on to that verse has really two options. Either he still sticks to his claim, the Quran still says that, nothing changed, and according to what he believes that the Quran is saying, and what ends up is that person looking like a stubborn religious fanatic who has really no idea what they're talking about. You either have that, or on the other hand, he lets go. He says, okay, sure, I was wrong, or even worse, the Quran was wrong. I believe you. Now you've just made it even worse, because now it either looks like the Quran is wrong, or it just looks like we Muslims have no idea what the Quran is talking about, and we're just making it up as we go. So my point is, don't do that. That's my point. You decided that the Quran said something, and you completely refused to believe anything else. And then when you got proven to be wrong, both ways it's a lose-lose. That's my point. And that's been happening over centuries. It's not something new that I'm mentioning. This is something that's been going on for hundreds of years. And that's how we got to where we are. Now, the flip side of that is somebody coming up with a new theory and deciding to look in the Quran for proof of that new theory, and then saying, okay, so my proof of this theory is a few scientific facts. It's still a theory, but also we have this verse in the Quran that says that. And I've seen this as well. I've seen it with the Big Bang, for example. Somebody decided to bring Quranic proof that the Big Bang is a thing. Now, I'm not going to talk about whether the Big Bang Theory is true or not. That's a different conversation altogether. My point is, why would you go to the Quran to prove something scientific? You don't. Maybe the Quran is right, but you are not necessarily right. You don't necessarily understand what the Quran is referring to. So, what then happens? Even scientists don't 100% accept the Big Bang Theory. So why would you, as a person who's religious, then decide no to go full out? 200 years later, the Big Bang Theory, for example, is scrapped. They bring another theory. This explains it better. But wait, I thought you said the Quran was talking about the Big Bang. I mean, I've seen the verse. It's not very specific at all when it comes to the Big Bang. It just generally refers to it. And somebody decided it was 100% proof. Again, 200 years later, if the Big Bang is completely disregarded, it will look again like we don't actually know what the Quran is trying to tell us. And again, this is a thing that's been going on for years now, and it's probably the main reason this opposition to religion happens when it comes to scientists. We also have the either or ideology, also known as a false dichotomy. Now, what this is where two things are regarded as conflicting, in the sense that you have to choose one or the other, even though in reality they could both happen together, or there's a third option. An example of this, there's many of these examples. For example, political elections. For example, in the US, I know a bunch of people who aren't exactly with the Republicans or with the Democrats. There's several other parties, but because they don't like the Republicans, they're forced to vote for the Democrats. Or if they don't like the Democrats, they need to vote for the Republicans. This is a false dichotomy. There are third options, but if you hate this one, you need to go for the other. Another example that we might be, well, some of us might be more related to is the Cristiano Ronaldo or Messi question. You might support any team. You could support Arsenal, Chelsea, but you still get asked Ronaldo or Messi. I don't know. Both of them are good. No, you have to choose one of them. This applies also over here, where because there's such a conflict between people who support religious ideas and people who support scientific ideas, it's as if you have to pick one of the two. You have to pick either religion or science. If you're religious, you need to support your religion. You can't choose science. You're failing your religion if you go with anything scientific. And if you're scientific, you need to push yourself away from religion, because religion is fantasy and etc. It's nothing material. So you have to choose science. We see the problem over here. You have to choose one or the other. Now, it's not all our fault. This is partly our fault, but also the Western world in general has been also sabotaged, because we're talking about religion in general. We're not talking about just Islam over here. So, for example, we have the church for centuries has, in the Western world, in the Middle Ages, medieval era, etc., until the 17th century, 18th century, it's been largely clouding the minds of its followers, with exceptions, obviously, but they've been trying to stop people from coming up with new ideas in science on the basis that it's blasphemy. We all know what happened with Nicholas Copernicus when he first came with the heliocentric concept. Obviously, again, there are exceptions, like, for example, George Mendel, who came with the genealogy. He was essentially the father of genealogy. There are exceptions, but generally speaking, when did Europe become more interested in science? During the Renaissance, during the scientific revolution. What was a scientific revolution? It was essentially, right, let's scrap the church, let's free ourselves from the binds of church, and let's do our own thing. And that's what happened. They started finding new information. Leonardo da Vinci, Isaac Newton, and all those ever since. And the idea became that, well, this is what happens when you free yourself from religion. And that's basically how the church kind of sabotaged the entire religious ideology. We also have atheists themselves. Atheists unfortunately, atheists have a bias they refuse anything that is told to them by religious people. Meaning, if I come and I say that religion says we have this, and it's a very similar concept to something that they already have in science, they'll refuse it. An example of this would be the fourth dimension. It's a very interesting concept. It's a theory which basically says if you have a 2D being, two-dimensional being, yeah? I have a piece of paper over here, and I draw a stickman. And let's imagine that this stickman is a living being. It's a 2D character with height and width, no depth. This 2D being will not be able to see me. There's no way it can see me, because in order to see me, it needs a third dimension that it doesn't have access to. It's a flat character. He can't see me. But I can see it. I can see this being at all times. There's nothing he can do to stop me from seeing it. Likewise, if we're talking about a fourth dimension, the theory goes that a four-dimensional character or being can see us at all times, but we can't see a four-dimensional character or being. Now, this is just a theory, and scientists will look at that and say, yeah, that's perfectly plausible, that makes sense. It's perfectly fine for there to be material beings that we can't see. Wait, hang on, I thought you had a problem with us. We were talking about angels. What happened with that? Why is it when you say something can exist without us seeing it, it's fine, but when I talk about angels, for example, angels being material and non-visible, why is that suddenly a problem? You see where the bias comes in? The reason this happens is because religion. It's very simple. It's because religion says that angels exist and therefore they cannot exist. Atheists are very stubborn when it comes to this. They make themselves look like they're just doing their own thing, but what they're trying to do is oppose religion entirely. Even if they don't say them, even if they don't